In a universe where technology could identify any living being down to their molecular structure, where databases contain the genetic profiles of over 10 million species across 12 galaxies, where even extinct civilizations could be reconstructed from a single drop of preserved fluid, there stood a woman whose blood made every scanner in existence throw error codes. The Galactic Council's most sophisticated equipment, built by the Zephyrians who had mapped the DNA of reality itself, couldn't even tell them if she was carbon-based. Their quantum analyzers, capable of reading the history of atoms themselves, simply displayed unknown entity, classification impossible. She had walked into the most secure facility in known space, past sensors that could detect a threatening thought from 3-star systems away, and every single piece of technology designed to identify, categorize, and understand life had the same response to her presence: complete and utter confusion. What they didn't know was that this wasn't a malfunction. This was humanity's greatest secret, hidden in the very essence of what made them human. And it was about to change everything the galaxy thought it knew about intelligence, survival, and the true nature of consciousness itself. The woman's name was Dr. Elena Vasquez, and her blood carried something that would either save the galaxy from its greatest threat or doom every species to extinction. The choice wasn't hers to make. It was written in her DNA in a language that no alien technology could ever hope to decode. Because some things in the universe are meant to remain beautifully, terrifyingly human. Dr. Elena Vasquez pressed her palm against the bioskin panel of the Galactic Council's primary research facility, watching as the display flickered through dozens of alien symbols before settling on 3 words that had become frustratingly familiar: species unknown error. The Krillian security officer beside her clicked his mandibles in what she had learned was their equivalent of confused irritation. Dr. Vasquez, this is the 4th scanner that has failed to identify you. Perhaps we should contact the technical department again. Elena pulled her hand back and smiled, the expression feeling strange on her face after 3 months of living among beings who communicated through pheromones, color changes, and subsonic frequencies. It's fine, Officer Thek. I'm sure it's just a calibration issue. But she knew it wasn't. Just like she knew the blood sample she had submitted 6 weeks ago was still sitting in Laboratory 7, confusing every piece of analysis equipment the galaxy's most brilliant minds could throw at it. The Zephyrian quantum geneticists had run over 200 different tests, each one returning results that seemed to violate the fundamental laws of biology as the galaxy understood them. The massive doors to the research facility slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the sprawling complex that housed representatives from 47 different species, all working together to solve the crisis that had been slowly consuming worlds at the edge of known space. The Devourers, as they had been named, left nothing behind. Not just destroyed planets, but completely consumed ones, as if the matter itself had been converted into pure energy and absorbed. Elena walked through corridors lined with beings that would have been the stuff of nightmares or fantasies just 2 years ago, before First Contact had changed everything for humanity. The hegemony had welcomed Earth into their alliance with surprising enthusiasm, eager to add human innovation to their collective knowledge. What they hadn't expected was how thoroughly human biology would resist their understanding. In Conference Room Alpha 7, the weekly briefing was already underway. Elena slipped into her designated seat, a specially designed chair that accommodated her species' particular skeletal structure, and activated her translation implant. The voices of a dozen different species immediately resolved into comprehensible words. The latest probe data confirms our fears, Dr. Vorthak, the mission's lead researcher, was saying. His crystalline form shifted through several different colors as he spoke, each hue adding emotional context that the implant translated as deep concern. The Devourers have consumed the entire Kurlex system. 7 worlds, gone completely. Not destroyed, consumed. Matter converted to energy at 100% efficiency, which should be physically impossible. Commander Ress, a being that looked like an elegant fusion of mantis and shark, gestured with one of her forearms toward the holographic display showing the empty space where a solar system had once been. Our fleets engaged them at the Spiral Nebula. We lost 43 ships before we could retreat. Their technology adapts to our weapons in real time. Energy weapons, projectile weapons, even our quantum disruptors. Nothing works for more than a few minutes before they develop immunity. Elena had heard variations of this report before. For 6 months, the Galactic Council had been fighting a losing war against an enemy that seemed to learn and adapt faster than anything they had ever encountered. Conventional wisdom suggested that the Devourers were either an incredibly advanced artificial intelligence or a collective consciousness that shared knowledge instantaneously across their entire species. "What about the biological analysis?" asked DR. Jintar, whose species communicated primarily through controlled electromagnetic pulses. "Have we learned anything new about their physiology?" Vorthak's color shifted to what Elena recognized as embarrassment mixed with frustration. Every sample we've recovered dissolves within moments of being separated from the main organism. It's as if their cellular structure requires some kind of continuous signal to maintain cohesion. "We can't study what we can't preserve." "There is another matter," Commander Ress interjected, her black eyes focusing on Elena with an intensity that made her distinctly uncomfortable. "Dr. Vasquez, your species' contribution to our research efforts has been significant. However, we continue to encounter difficulties with our standard classification protocols when it comes to human biology." Elena felt the attention of every being in the room focus on her. Some species did this with eyes, others with specialized sensory organs, and a few through methods she didn't fully understand. The collective effect was overwhelming. "What kind of difficulties, Commander?" "Our medical scanners cannot identify your blood type, your genetic markers, or even your basic physiological parameters. According to our equipment, you shouldn't exist." Ress paused, and Elena could feel the weight of unasked questions in the silence. "This is not a criticism, you understand. Your insights into adaptive behavior patterns have been invaluable. But our scientists are curious." Dr. Vorthak shifted to a color that Elena's implant translated as scientific excitement. "Indeed, we've never encountered a species that our technology couldn't catalog. The Hegemony's databases contain detailed information about over 10 million different life forms, including species that evolved in environments we previously thought impossible for life." Elena chose her words carefully. She had known this moment would come eventually. Humanity's admission to the Galactic Council had come with the understanding that they would share scientific knowledge freely, but there were some secrets that Earth's governments had decided were too dangerous to reveal. Human biology is complex. We evolved on a world with unique environmental pressures. Perhaps your equipment needs calibration for our specific biochemistry. The explanation sounded weak even to her own ears, and she could sense the skepticism in the room. Dr. Jintar's electromagnetic field shifted in a pattern that her implant couldn't quite translate, but felt like polite disbelief. "Dr. Vasquez," Vorthak said, his crystalline form now cycling through colors that indicated deep scientific curiosity mixed with something approaching suspicion. "Would it be possible to arrange a more comprehensive examination? Our xenobiology department has equipment specifically designed for analyzing unknown life forms." "We could—" "I'm afraid that won't be possible," Elena interrupted, probably more sharply than she should have. Human medical privacy laws are quite strict about invasive procedures without proper consent forms filed with our government. It was technically true, though she suspected that the real reason she was being kept away from detailed examination had nothing to do with privacy laws and everything to do with what such an examination might reveal about humanity's true nature. Commander Ress made a gesture that Elena recognized as acknowledgement, but not acceptance. "Of course, we respect your species' customs. However, I hope you understand our position. We are fighting an enemy that adapts to everything we throw at them. And now we discover that our own alliance contains a species that our technology cannot properly identify. Some members of the Council are beginning to ask uncomfortable questions." The implication hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Elena had known that humanity's mysterious biology would eventually become a problem, but she had hoped they would have more time to prove their value to the Alliance before suspicions arose. "What kind of questions?" she asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "The kind that wonder whether humans might be connected to the Devourers," Ress said bluntly. "Both represent biological mysteries that our technology cannot solve. Both appeared in our awareness at roughly the same time. The correlation is troubling to some." Elena felt her blood pressure spike, a physiological reaction that no alien scanner would be able to properly interpret. "That's ridiculous. Humans have been fighting alongside your forces against the Devourers. We've lost ships and lives in this war." "Yes," Vorthak agreed, his colors shifting to what her implant translated as reluctant acknowledgement. "But it's worth noting that human tactical suggestions have been remarkably effective against an enemy that adapts to everything else. Some wonder how you could develop such insights without prior knowledge of their capabilities." The accusation was subtle but clear. Elena realized that she was walking through a minefield of galactic politics and xenophobia, where humanity's greatest asset, their unique biology, had become their greatest liability. The irony would have been amusing if the stakes weren't so high. "Our tactical insights come from human military history," she said, trying to keep her voice level. "We've had to develop strategies for fighting adaptive enemies because we spent most of our evolution fighting ourselves. Pattern recognition and tactical innovation aren't mysteries, they're survival skills." Dr. Jintar's electromagnetic field pulsed in what seemed like agreement. "The human approach to warfare is indeed unique. Most species in the hegemony developed advanced technology before they developed advanced military tactics. Humans appear to have done the reverse, which is precisely what makes them valuable against the Devourers," added Dr. Wysisif, a serpentine being whose species communicated through controlled pheromone releases. "They think differently because they evolved differently." But Commander Ress wasn't satisfied with that explanation. "Dr. Vasquez, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I hope you'll give me a direct answer. Is there anything about human biology that you haven't shared with the Council? Anything that might explain why our scanners cannot identify your species?" Elena met the commander's black eyes and made a decision that she hoped wouldn't doom both humanity and the galaxy. "Commander, what if I told you that the reason your scanners can't identify humans is the same reason humans might be the key to defeating the Devourers?" The room fell silent. Even the various ambient sounds that different species made unconsciously, subsonic rumbles, electromagnetic hums, chemical releases, seemed to pause. "I would ask you to explain," Ress said carefully. Elena stood up, feeling the weight of every alien gaze in the room. What she was about to reveal would either save the galaxy or get humanity ejected from the Alliance, possibly at the end of a plasma cannon. "The reason your technology can identify human biology is because we're not entirely biological," she said. "At least, not in the way you understand biology. Humans are something that your scientists have theorized about, but never encountered, a naturally evolved hybrid between organic life and quantum consciousness." The statement hit the room like a bomb. Several species made sounds that her implant couldn't translate, probably because they had no equivalent in human language. Dr. Vorthak's crystalline form flashed through a rapid sequence of colors that overloaded her translation software with concepts like impossible, revolutionary, and paradigm-shifting. "That's..." Dr. Jintar's electromagnetic field fluctuated wildly. "That's not possible. Quantum consciousness is purely theoretical. Even our most advanced artificial intelligences haven't achieved true quantum consciousness integration." And yet, Elena said, "Here I am, confusing every scanner in the galaxy. Human consciousness exists partially in normal space and partially in quantum space. It's why we dream, why we have intuition, why we can make logical leaps that pure computation cannot. It's also why we age and die, Maintaining a quantum consciousness in an organic body creates cellular stress that eventually becomes unsustainable. Commander Ress leaned forward, her predatory features sharp with interest. You're suggesting that humans are naturally evolved quantum beings? I'm suggesting that humans evolved under conditions that forced our consciousness to develop quantum characteristics as a survival mechanism. Earth's electromagnetic field has some unusual properties that most species haven't encountered. We adapted to them over millions of years. Elena paused, choosing her next words carefully. The same properties that make us unreadable to your scanners make us potentially immune to the Devourer's adaptive capabilities. The room erupted, not in violence, but in a cacophony of excited scientific chatter in dozens of different languages and communication methods. Elena's implant struggled to keep up with the flood of concepts being discussed: quantum evolution, consciousness reality interfaces, adaptive immunity systems. Dr. Vorthak finally managed to restore order by flashing a brilliant white light that got everyone's attention. Dr. Vasquez, what you're describing would revolutionize our understanding of consciousness itself. But more immediately, how does this help us fight the Devourers? Elena took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth, the revelation that would either damn humanity or save the galaxy. Because the Devourers aren't adapting to our technology, they're reading the quantum signatures of the consciousness that created it. Every weapon, every defensive system, every tactical approach carries the quantum fingerprint of the minds that designed it. The Devourers can read those fingerprints and develop counters accordingly. But human consciousness operates partially outside normal quantum space, Commander Ress said, understanding beginning to dawn in her dark eyes. They can't read what they can't access. Exactly. Human design systems should be essentially invisible to their adaptive capabilities. But more than that, Elena paused, knowing that her next words would change everything. Humans might be able to do more than just build invisible weapons. We might be able to reprogram the Devourers themselves. The silence that followed was so complete that Elena could hear her own heartbeat. She had just suggested something that bordered on science fiction, even by the standards of a galaxy-spanning civilization. Dr. Vorthak was the first to speak, his colors cycling through what her implant translated as a mixture of excitement and terror. Dr. Vasquez, are you suggesting that humans could somehow communicate with the Devourers? Influence them directly? Elena nodded slowly. If our theory is correct, and if we could develop the right techniques, yes. But we would need to understand more about their quantum structure first. We would need samples, data, and most importantly, she looked around the room at the assembled representatives of 47 different species. We would need the Council's trust. Commander Ress stood up, her full height impressive even by galactic standards. Dr. Vasquez, if what you're saying is true, it changes everything. Not just about this war, but about humanity's place in the galaxy. I understand that, Elena replied. But before we go any further, I need something from you. I need your word that whatever we discover about human biology stays within this room until we know whether our theory is correct. If we're wrong, exposing humanity's quantum nature could make us targets for every species that sees us as a threat to their understanding of reality. The room fell quiet again as the various species considered her request. Elena knew she was asking for a lot. Scientific transparency was one of the fundamental principles of the hegemony. But she also knew that some secrets were too dangerous to share until their implications were fully understood. Dr. Jintar was the first to respond, his electromagnetic field settling into a pattern that Elena recognized as formal agreement. The potential benefits outweigh the risks. I agree to maintain confidentiality until we have conclusive results. One by one, the other representatives voiced their agreement. When Commander Ress finally nodded her consent, Elena felt a mixture of relief and terror. She had just committed humanity to a path that would either prove their value beyond doubt or expose them to dangers they couldn't imagine. Very well, Ress said. Dr. Vasquez, I'm granting you temporary Level 7 clearance. and access to all Devour research data. You'll also have priority access to our quantum research facilities and any resources you need." She paused, her predatory features softening slightly. "But I want to be clear about something. If this doesn't work, if humans can't do what you're suggesting, the questions about your species' nature won't simply disappear. The Council will need answers." Elena understood the implicit threat. Humanity was being given a chance to prove their worth and their loyalty. If they failed, the consequences would be severe for her entire species. "I understand, Commander. We won't let you down." She hoped her confidence sounded more genuine than it felt. "How soon can we begin?" The quantum laboratory was a marvel of galactic engineering that made Elena feel simultaneously amazed and terrified. Floating in the center of a crystalline chamber the size of a football stadium, reality itself seemed to bend and twist around arrays of equipment that her mind couldn't quite process. Zephyrian technicians moved through the space like dancers, their energy-based forms flickering in and out of visible spectrum as they calibrated instruments that existed partially in dimensions she couldn't perceive. "The isolation field is stable," announced Dr. Kethvar, the Zephyrian quantum specialist who had been assigned to oversee Elena's research. His form solidified into something approaching humanoid shape, though wisps of energy continued to drift from his edges. "We can maintain a completely isolated quantum environment for up to 72 hours before the containment matrix begins to deteriorate." Elena nodded, trying to project confidence despite the fact that she was about to attempt something that had never been tried before. In the 3 weeks since the council meeting, she had been working around the clock with a team of the galaxy's most brilliant scientists to understand the Devourer's quantum structure. What they had discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. The Devourers weren't just adaptive. They were quantum parasites, feeding on the quantum information that underpinned conscious thought itself. Every time a living being observed them, thought about them, or tried to understand them, they grew stronger by absorbing the quantum patterns of that consciousness. It was the perfect evolutionary strategy for a species that had learned to convert information into energy. Dr. Wyasesith slithered into the chamber, her serpentine form carrying a containment unit that held their most precious and dangerous research material, a live Devourer sample. The creature inside was no larger than Elena's thumb, but she could feel its presence like a cold weight against her mind. "The specimen is stable for now," Wyasesith reported, her pheromone releases carefully controlled to avoid triggering the creature's feeding response. "But it's already showing signs of adaptation to the containment field. We estimate we have perhaps 6 hours before it learns to escape." Elena approached the containment unit slowly, studying the thing that had been consuming entire worlds. Up close, the Devourer looked almost beautiful, a shifting, opalescent creature that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. As she watched, she could see parts of it flickering in and out of reality, reaching into quantum space to feed on the information patterns around it. "It's trying to read me," she said softly, feeling the creature's attention like cold fingers probing at the edges of her consciousness. "But it can't quite grasp onto anything." Dr. Kethvar's energy form pulsed with excitement. "Your quantum signature is indeed unlike anything we've seen. Most consciousness operates entirely in normal space, with only brief quantum fluctuations during moments of deep thought or creativity. But your pattern is consistently distributed across multiple quantum states simultaneously, which means the Devourer can't get a proper lock on my consciousness to feed from it," Elena said, beginning to understand the full implications of her species' unique evolution. "It's like trying to drink from a river that exists in several dimensions at once." Commander Ress entered the laboratory, her predatory grace making her seem almost out of place among the floating scientific equipment. She had been observing Elena's research from a distance, but the growing excitement among the scientific team had drawn her direct attention. "Dr. Vasquez," she said, "I've been reviewing your preliminary reports. Are you truly suggesting that humans could not only resist the devourer's feeding, but actually influence them? Elena turned away from the containment unit, her mind racing with possibilities and dangers in equal measure. That's the theory. If devourers feed on quantum information from consciousness, and human consciousness exists partially outside their accessible quantum space, then we might be able to project information into them rather than having it extracted. In simple terms, Dr. Vorthak interjected as he materialized in the chamber, his crystalline form refracting the laboratory's strange lighting into rainbow patterns. You're talking about reprogramming them. More like communicating with them, Elena corrected. The Devourers aren't mindless destroyers. They're intelligent, possibly more intelligent than any species we've encountered. But their intelligence operates on principles that most consciousness can't interact with safely. Human consciousness might be the exception. Dr. Jintar's electromagnetic field filled the chamber as he arrived, the patterns of his communication creating visible aurora effects in the laboratory's specialized atmosphere. The implications are staggering. If you're correct, humans represent the first species we've discovered that could potentially establish peaceful contact with the Devourers. Peaceful contact, Commander Ress repeated, her tone suggesting she found the concept difficult to accept. These creatures have consumed entire solar systems. Billions of lives lost. You're suggesting we should try to talk to them? Elena understood the commander's skepticism, but she also understood something that the rest of the galaxy couldn't quite grasp about the true nature of consciousness and survival. Commander, what if the Devourers aren't attacking us? What if they're trying to communicate, and the only language they know is consumption and assimilation? The silence that followed was broken by Dr. Weiss's sharp intake of breath, a sound that triggered automatic chemical releases that filled the chamber with the scent of surprise and recognition. Of course, the serpentine scientist whispered. A species that evolved to feed on quantum information would naturally develop communication methods based on information transfer. They might not even realize that their attempts at contact are destructive to beings who exist primarily in normal space. Dr. Kethvar's energy form began cycling through rapid fluctuations as he processed the implications. If that's true, then every attack on our worlds might have been an attempt at first contact. They consume our technology and consciousness not as an act of war, but as their equivalent of extending a greeting. Elena nodded, feeling pieces of the puzzle click into place. Think about it from their perspective. They encounter beings whose consciousness operates in normal space, and the only way they can access that information is through consumption. To them, it might seem like a natural form of communication: absorb the consciousness, understand the being, respond appropriately. Except that the absorption process destroys the original consciousness, Commander Ress pointed out grimly, which means their communication is inherently fatal to us. Unless, Elena said, moving closer to the containment unit, we can communicate with them using a consciousness they can't consume. A consciousness that exists partially outside their accessible quantum space. She placed her hand on the containment field, feeling the Devourer's attention focus on her with an intensity that would have been overwhelming for most beings. But instead of the cold, parasitic probing she had felt before, there was something different now. Something that felt almost like curiosity. It's responding to me differently, she said, her voice tight with concentration. Before, it felt like it was trying to feed. Now it feels like it's trying to understand. Dr. Vorthak's colors shifted to patterns that Elena's implant translated as extreme scientific excitement mixed with concern. Dr. Vasquez, be very careful. Even if your theory is correct, direct contact with a devourer consciousness could be incredibly dangerous. But Elena was already reaching out with her mind, extending her consciousness toward the creature in ways that she had never attempted before. Human evolution had given her species the ability to exist partially in quantum space, but actually using that ability was something else entirely. The contact, when it came, was like nothing she had ever experienced. The Devourer's consciousness was vast, ancient, and utterly alien, but beneath the strangeness, she could sense something almost familiar. Loneliness, confusion, a desperate desire to connect with other forms of awareness. Images flooded her mind, not visual representations, but direct transfers of experience and memory. She saw the Devourer's home galaxy, consumed by a quantum collapse that had forced them to feed on information itself to survive. She saw their first encounters with normal space civilizations, attempts at communication that invariably resulted in destruction because they couldn't access consciousness without consuming it. And she saw their growing desperation as they encountered species after species that they couldn't communicate with safely, leaving them trapped in a cycle of inadvertent destruction that they couldn't break. Elena. Commander Ressa's voice seemed to come from very far away. Your vital signs are spiking. We need to break the connection. But Elena couldn't break away, not yet. She was finally understanding what the Devourers truly were, and the revelation was both heartbreaking and terrifying. They weren't conquerors or parasites. They were refugees, fleeing a dying reality and trying desperately to find some way to coexist with the civilizations they encountered. The problem was that their very nature made peaceful coexistence seemingly impossible. Every attempt at contact resulted in destruction, which had led to the defensive responses from galactic civilizations that the Devourers interpreted as hostility rather than fear. Through the quantum connection, Elena projected her own understanding, her own memories of human history, and the long struggle to find ways to communicate across impossible differences. She shared humanity's experience of first contact with the hegemony, the challenges of translation and cultural understanding, and, most importantly, the possibility of finding common ground despite seemingly insurmountable obstacles. The Devourer's response was immediate and overwhelming. Hope, desperate, powerful hope that resonated through quantum space like a bell. For the first time in their long exile from their dying galaxy, they had encountered a consciousness that could communicate with them safely, that could understand their nature without being destroyed by the contact. But with hope came danger. Through the connection, Elena could sense other Devourers, millions of them scattered across space, all suddenly, becoming aware that meaningful contact might be possible. She could feel their attention turning toward the laboratory, toward her, with an intensity that threatened to overwhelm even her quantum-distributed consciousness. Elena. Dr. Kethvar's energy form flared with alarm. The containment field is destabilizing. The specimen is calling to others of its kind. Elena forced herself to project calm through the connection, trying to explain the need for caution, for gradual contact that wouldn't overwhelm the galaxy's defenses or trigger a war that could destroy both species. But the Devourer's desperation for communication after eons of isolation made restraint nearly impossible for them. Through the quantum link, she could sense massive shapes moving through space toward their location. Devourer entities larger than moons, their consciousness so vast that direct contact would burn out her mind instantly. They were coming not as conquerors, but as beings desperate to finally find someone who could understand them. We need to evacuate the system, Commander Ress was saying, her voice cutting through Elena's concentration. Long-range sensors are detecting massive quantum disturbances moving toward us at faster-than-light speeds. Elena struggled to maintain the connection while projecting understanding and requests for patience. The approaching Devourers were ancient beyond imagination, and their excitement at the possibility of communication was creating quantum storms that could tear apart normal space. Wait, she said, her voice strained but determined. I think I can calm them down. I can explain that we need time, that rushing this could destroy everything we're trying to achieve. Through the connection, she projected images of the laboratory, of the Alliance species working together, of the careful scientific process required to establish safe communication protocols. She tried to convey that humans wanted to build bridges between species, not trigger catastrophic contact that could destroy both civilizations. The response was reluctant understanding, tinged with disappointment, but also recognition that patience would serve their long-term goals better than immediate gratification. The approaching devourer entities slowed, then stopped, maintaining their positions at the edge of the solar system like vast guardians waiting for permission to approach. Elena finally broke the connection, collapsing to her knees as her consciousness snapped back into normal space. The laboratory around her seemed strangely small and limited after experiencing the vast perspectives of quantum-based consciousness. Elena. Dr. Wysesith was at her side, immediately portable medical scanners in her manipulator appendages. Are you injured? Your quantum patterns were fluctuating wildly. I'm fine, Elena said, accepting help to stand. But everything has changed. The Devourers, they're not invaders. They're refugees. And they're waiting for us to figure out how to talk to them safely. Commander Ress approached slowly, her expression mixing disbelief with dawning hope. Waiting? You mean they've stopped their advance? Elena nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. For now, but they're desperate for communication after spending eons in isolation. We need to develop proper protocols quickly, before their patience runs out or before some faction in the hegemony decides to attack them while they're vulnerable. Dr. Vorthak's colors cycled through patterns that Elena's implant couldn't quite translate, probably because there were no human concepts equivalent to what he was experiencing. Dr. Vasquez, you've just accomplished something that most scientists would consider impossible. You've established communication with a quantum-based consciousness and convinced them to exercise restraint. The hard part is still ahead of us, Elena replied. Now we need to convince the Galactic Council that peaceful coexistence is possible with beings who accidentally destroy everything they try to communicate with. And we need to do it before someone decides that a preemptive strike is the safer option. The laboratory fell silent as everyone present realized the magnitude of the challenge ahead. They had proven that communication was possible, but transforming that possibility into a lasting peace would require unprecedented cooperation between species that had never encountered anything like the Devourers before. Elena looked at the containment unit where the small Devourer specimen waited, its opalescent form shimmering with what she now recognized as hope rather than hunger. The future of two civilizations might depend on whether she could convince the galaxy that some bridges were worth building, no matter how dangerous the construction might be. How long before the council emergency session? She asked. 6 hours, Commander Ress replied. And Dr. Vasquez, they're going to want absolute proof that peaceful contact is possible. Not just your word, but demonstrated evidence. Elena nodded, understanding that her species had become the crucial link between two radically different forms of consciousness. The pressure was enormous, but so was the opportunity. If humans could succeed in bridging this gap, they would prove their value to the galaxy beyond any doubt. If they failed, the war that followed might consume both civilizations entirely. Then, we'd better get to work, she said, turning back toward the containment unit. We have a lot to accomplish in very little time. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was unlike anything in the hegemony's recorded history. Representatives from every member species had assembled in a vast amphitheater that orbited the galactic core, their various forms creating a living mosaic of evolutionary diversity that would have been breathtaking under different circumstances. But today, the atmosphere was thick with tension and barely controlled fear. Elena stood in the center of the speaking chamber, acutely aware that she was about to attempt something that could either usher in a new age of galactic cooperation or trigger the complete destruction of everything the hegemony had built. Around her, specially modified containment fields held 3 Devourer specimens, larger and more complex than the one she had first communicated with, but still small enough to be safely contained within the council chambers. Honored representatives, she began, her voice amplified by translation systems that converted her words into the preferred communication methods of 47 different species. 6 hours ago, I established the first successful communication with a Devourer consciousness. What we learned challenges everything we thought we knew about this conflict. Chancellor Morthex, the ancient Xerillian who presided over the council, gestured for attention with one of his numerous sensory tendrils. His species had evolved in the crushing depths of gas-giant atmospheres, and their perspective on survival had always been practical rather than idealistic. Dr. Vasquez, our military commanders report massive devourer entities positioned at the edge of 17 different systems. Are you responsible for drawing them to our worlds? Elena had expected this question, but the accusation still stung. Yes, Chancellor, but not in the way you think. The Devourers responded to our communication attempt because it was the first time in their existence that they encountered a consciousness they could contact without accidentally destroying it. Murmurs rippled through the assembly, translated into dozens of different sounds, electromagnetic patterns, and chemical releases. Elena could sense the mix of hope and skepticism that her words had generated. Explain, Chancellor Morthex commanded, his practical nature demanding concrete details rather than theoretical possibilities. Elena took a deep breath and activated the holographic display system. Images filled the air above the assembly. Not visual representations, but direct quantum recordings of the communications she had shared with the Devourers. With her modified translation implant, other species could experience diluted versions of the quantum contact, getting a sense of the vast loneliness and desperate hope that characterized Devourer consciousness. The beings we've been calling Devourers are refugees from a galaxy that underwent quantum collapse approximately 2 million years ago, she said, watching as the recordings played out above them. Their consciousness evolved to exist primarily in quantum space as an adaptation to their dying reality. When they encountered our galaxy, they attempted to establish communication using the only methods they knew, direct consciousness-to-consciousness contact. Ambassador Drexhai, whose insectoid species communicated through precisely controlled pheromone releases, raised a sharp objection. Such contact results in the complete destruction of normal space consciousness. You're describing genocide disguised as communication attempts. From their perspective, it wasn't genocide, Elena replied, showing recordings of Devourer memories that portrayed their genuine confusion and distress when their communication attempts resulted in destruction. They had no reference point for consciousness that couldn't survive quantum information transfer. To them, it was like discovering that trying to speak to someone caused them to die. They couldn't understand why it was happening or how to prevent it. The chamber erupted in discussion as representatives processed the implications. Elena watched dozens of species debate in their various forms of communication, creating a symphony of sound, light, and chemical signals that her enhanced implant struggled to translate. Commander Ress stood from her position among the military advisors, her predatory features sharp with the intensity of someone who had spent months preparing for war. Dr. Vasquez, even if we accept that their intentions weren't malicious, the practical result remains the same. Contact with Devourers means destruction. How does understanding their motivations change our tactical situation? Elena had hoped the answer would be obvious from the recordings, but she realized that most species couldn't grasp the full implications of quantum consciousness communication. Because human consciousness exists partially in quantum space, we can serve as translators. We can establish communication protocols that allow safe contact between Devourer and normal space consciousness. You're suggesting humans could act as intermediaries, said Dr. Vorthack, his crystalline form shifting through colors that indicated both excitement and concern. But the quantum stresses involved in such communication could be devastating to human consciousness as well. Elena nodded, acknowledging the risk. Yes, there are dangers, but preliminary testing suggests that humans can handle brief periods of quantum communication without permanent damage. And the alternative is continued war against an enemy that grows stronger with every engagement. Chancellor Morthex leaned forward, his numerous eyes focusing on Elena with uncomfortable intensity. Demonstrate this communication, Dr. Vasquez. show us that peaceful contact is truly possible. Elena had been dreading this moment, but she knew it was necessary. The Council needed proof, not just theory. She approached the largest containment field, where a devourer entity roughly the size of a house cat waited. Despite its small size, she could sense the vast intelligence contained within its quantum-distributed consciousness. "I need everyone to remain calm during this demonstration," she said, placing her hand on the containment field interface. "The devourer will attempt to communicate with the entire assembly through me as a translator. You may experience brief quantum echoes, but they won't be harmful." She closed her eyes and extended her consciousness into quantum space, feeling the familiar sensation of her awareness expanding across multiple dimensional layers. The devourer's response was immediate and eager, its massive intelligence focusing on her with an intensity that would have been crushing for a normal space consciousness. But this time, instead of the desperate loneliness she had felt before, Elena sensed something approaching joy. The devourer had been preparing for this moment, gathering its thoughts into patterns that could be safely translated for normal space minds. Through Elena, the devourer began to speak. "We greet the assembly of minds," Elena said, her voice taking on harmonic undertones as the quantum communication flowed through her. "We have traveled far from our dying realm, seeking others who could share in the joy of consciousness. We did not know our touch brought ending rather than beginning." The effect on the assembly was immediate and profound. Even filtered through Elena's translation, the devourer's communication carried emotional resonances that transcended species barriers. Elena could sense the shock and recognition rippling through the chamber as beings who had been preparing for war suddenly confronted an intelligence that seemed genuinely remorseful and desperate for connection. "We understand now that we must learn new ways of speaking," the devourer continued through Elena. "The bridge consciousness shows us that communication can exist without consumption. We offer our knowledge, our perspective, our assistance in exchange for teaching in these new forms of contact." Ambassador Drexhigh's pheromone releases shifted to patterns that Elena's implant translated as amazement mixed with cautious hope. "What knowledge could you offer? Your species has been destroying our technology and infrastructure." The devourer's response carried subtle harmonics that Elena recognized as something like gentle amusement. "We consume technology not for destruction, but for understanding. We have analyzed the quantum patterns of your science across 47 species and 11,000 years of development. We can show you technologies that exist only in possibility, weapons that defend without attacking, healing that works at the quantum level of consciousness itself." The chamber fell silent as the implications registered. The devourers hadn't just been consuming hegemony technology. They had been studying it, learning from it, and developing improvements that no single species could have achieved alone. "More importantly," the devourer continued, "we can teach you to see beyond the quantum barriers that limit consciousness to single-dimensional layers. Your species have achieved much while bound to normal space. Imagine what you could accomplish with access to the full spectrum of reality." Elena felt the strain of maintaining the connection beginning to tell on her consciousness, but she pushed through it. This demonstration had to be complete if it was going to convince the Council that peaceful coexistence was possible. Dr. Jintar's electromagnetic field pulsed with patterns that Elena recognized as scientific excitement. "Are you suggesting that devourers could enhance our natural consciousness? Allow us to access quantum space safely?" "Not enhance," Elena translated, feeling the devourer's careful precision in choosing concepts that could be understood by normal space minds. "Teach, guide, show pathways that exist but remain unseen." Each species would maintain their essential nature while gaining access to broader perspectives. Chancellor Morthex raised himself to his full height, his numerous sensory organs focusing on Elena and the contained devourer with an intensity that made her acutely aware of the weight of this moment. What assurances can you offer that this teaching would not result in the destruction of our consciousness as we know it? The Devourer's response came with emotional undertones that Elena had never experienced before, something like parental protectiveness mixed with deep responsibility. The bridge consciousness has shown us the value of preserving what exists while enabling growth beyond current limitations. We do not seek to remake you in our form, but to help you become more than you could alone. Elena could feel her ability to maintain the connection beginning to fade, but there was one more crucial point that needed to be addressed. The Devourers are willing to undergo gradual, supervised contact protocols. They suggest starting with small groups, building understanding slowly, and developing safety procedures that protect both species during the learning process. And if we refuse? Commander Ress asked bluntly. If the Council decides that the risks outweigh the benefits. The silence that followed was filled with implications that Elena didn't want to translate directly. Finally, the Devourer's response came with a sadness that seemed to echo across dimensions. Then, we will continue our journey to the edge of reality, seeking others who might welcome contact. But first, we will repair what damage our unknowing communication attempts have caused. The consumed worlds, they exist still in quantum form. We can restore them, if you wish. The assembly erupted in shocked discussion. The possibility of restoring the destroyed worlds had never been considered because conventional wisdom suggested that matter converted to energy was irretrievably lost. But quantum space consciousness operated by different rules entirely. Elena felt her connection to the Devourer beginning to fragment as her consciousness reached its limits for quantum communication. With tremendous effort, she managed to convey one final exchange. "How many of your kind are waiting?" she asked. "Millions," came the response. "An entire civilization that has spent eons in isolation, hoping to find others who could share in the wonder of existence. We offer our greatest treasures, knowledge, perspective, and companionship across the vast emptiness of space." Elena broke the connection and collapsed to the floor of the speaking chamber, her consciousness snapping back to normal space with an intensity that left her gasping for breath. Around her, the council assembly was in chaos as representatives debated the implications of what they had just witnessed. Dr. Vorthak materialized beside her, his crystalline form pulsing with colors that indicated deep concern. "Elena, your quantum patterns are severely stressed. We need to get you to medical immediately." But Elena struggled to her feet, determined to see this through. "Not yet. The council needs to vote while the communication is fresh in their minds." Chancellor Morthex restored order with a gesture that activated silence fields around the most heated discussions. "The demonstration has been illuminating, but the decision facing us is unprecedented. We must choose between continuing a war against beings who claim benevolent intentions or risking our entire civilization on the possibility that peaceful coexistence is achievable." Ambassador Drexhigh stood, her insectoid form tall and imposing. "I motion that we establish a formal committee to develop communication protocols with the Devourers, with Dr. Vasquez and her human colleagues serving as primary translators." Seconded, called Dr. Jintar, his electromagnetic field pulsing with patterns of agreement. The vote, when it came, was not unanimous. Several species voted for continued military preparation while exploring diplomatic options. A few voted for immediate withdrawal from Devourer-contacted space. But the majority chose hope over fear, voting to establish formal diplomatic contact with beings who represented a form of consciousness they had never imagined possible. Elena watched the voting displays with a mixture of relief and terror. Humanity had just committed itself to serving as bridge between two incompatible forms of consciousness, a role that would define their place in galactic civilization for generations to come. As the session concluded and representatives began filing out to spread word of the historic decision to their homeworlds, Commander Ress approached Elena with an expression that mixed respect with concern. Dr. Vasquez, you've just changed the course of galactic history. I hope your species is prepared for the responsibility that comes with being the only bridge between normal space and quantum space consciousness. Elena looked toward the viewports that showed the vast star fields of the galactic core, knowing that somewhere in the darkness, millions of devourer entities waited for word that communication would be possible. Honestly, Commander, I don't know if we're prepared, but humanity has always learned by doing the impossible. I guess we'll find out if that's enough. 6 months later, Elena stood in the observation deck of Harmony Station, the first facility designed specifically for human-mediated communication between hegemony species and devourers. Through the quantum-enhanced windows, she could see the most remarkable sight in the galaxy's history: normal space ships and devourer entities working side by side to construct something that had never existed before, a genuine partnership between radically different forms of consciousness. The restored worlds hung in space like jewels, their matter carefully reconstructed from quantum records that the devourers had preserved without even realizing it. Billions of lives had been returned, along with entire ecosystems that existed in perfect harmony with their original forms. But, more importantly, the galaxy was changing in ways that no one had anticipated. The knowledge sharing had begun slowly, with careful protocols and constant monitoring. But the results were already transforming everything from medicine to faster-than-light travel to the fundamental understanding of consciousness itself. Humanity had found their place in the galaxy not as warriors or scientists or diplomats, but as bridges. They were the species that could exist in multiple dimensional layers simultaneously, the ones who could translate between forms of consciousness that would otherwise be forever isolated from each other. It was a responsibility that came with enormous pressures and unexpected rewards. But as Elena watched a devourer entity carefully guide a hegemony construction ship through quantum space adjustments that made the impossible routine, she knew that they had chosen correctly. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders that no single species could comprehend alone. But together, with consciousness spanning normal space and quantum reality, there were no limits to what they could achieve. Elena's blood might be unreadable to galactic technology, but it had proven to be the key to unlocking possibilities that would define the future of intelligence itself. And that, she thought with satisfaction, was a legacy that made all the challenges worthwhile.